one person said to us that Jennifer's mentor gave her bad advice in telling her to stay with me and to work our marriage out. That was Todd Binkert said that. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Is that really what we've come to? Do we want the Southern Baptist Convention to be about, if you have troubles in your marriage, if they reach a certain point, there's nothing that can be done unless you have a Cinderella, riding off into the sunset marriage, you need to get out of it. Marriage is messy because there's two sinners that are married to each other. And we need to know that the gospel can change us and transform it. Well, it happened on April 11th, which was the Monday after Jennifer had published that. And I remember that I got a text from Tom Askell, actually. And he said, "Have you seen this?" And I hadn't at that point. And I opened it up, and we were pretty devastated.
After the hit piece by Baptist News Global on April 11th, the Bucks over the next couple weeks began to process and piece together all the evidence they had at the time to try to figure out how Jennifer's rough draft got leaked to the public, while also enduring the slander and gossip of people accusing Tom Buck as an abuser.
People make comments on Twitter all the time about him being an abusive man, and it's just, it never stops. We don't get away from it.
On April 19th, 2022, the elders of Lindale First Baptist Church published an article on their website, chronologically listing the series of events that led to this whole fiasco, and called for the trustee board of Southeastern should look further into the involvement of Karen Pryor and Dr. Aiken. The same day, Dr. Aiken responds to the elder's statement and reveals Keith was the third party that approached Karen to authenticate the rough draft, and Dr. Aiken revealed what he was told about the situation that occurred with Karen and Keith. But despite the odd and questionable testimonies of Keith and Karen, Dr. Aiken near the end of the statement concluded no Southeastern personnel were involved in responding to a request to verify the story, and to the knowledge of those at Southeastern, the story was not verified until it was published by the Bucks on G3's website on April 7th. Eventually, this led to Tom and Jennifer Buck to meet on a recorded Zoom call with Dr. Aiken, Rachel Denhollander, and Karen Pryor on May 6, 2022, to discuss and examine Karen Pryor's testimony and what had occurred. And then the next week, May 11th, 2022, the Bucks met again with Dr. Aiken, Rachel Denhollander, Keith Whitfield, 3 elders of First Lindale Baptist Church, and 2 members of the Board of Trustees of Southeastern to call on Southeastern to do an investigation. Much of the highlights of both those meetings have already been shown in this documentary, so it's not worth repeating. But during the May 11th meeting, all parties agreed to the third-party investigation into what happened at Southeastern.
I do think if we're going to do that, we need written parameters for how the investigation is going to be done. We need advice on who that party could be. We need to think through this process pretty carefully in terms of how it's done.
And in both the May 6th and May 11th meetings, Dr. Aiken was very eager to launch an investigation and expose who did this.
And whoever was shopping that thing around is evil and wicked, and I hope that they can be exposed. Since you're really concerned about Southeastern and whatever we might have done or not done, fine. I'll open up our school fully and completely.
But that will sadly never materialize. On May 12th, the initial talks of launching an investigation begins. Danny Aiken writes to Tom Buck saying that Southeastern will cover up to $150,000 of the investigation costs. As for the cost, Southeastern will welcome any assistance, but we are prepared to bear the cost of the investigation up to $150,000. The next day, May 13th, both Tom and Jennifer Buck emailed Dr. Aiken that they will waive attorney-client privilege surrounding the situation of my rough draft being leaked and all that transpired before or after March 26, 2022 in relation to this. And they also agreed not to pursue legal action either against them personally or Southeastern as an institution. And the Bucks will also remain silent and not say anything public until the private investigation was complete. And between May 14th through May 20th is a series of email exchanges between Tom, Rachel, and Danny Aiken on the choice of a firm to conduct the investigation. Here are some of the highlights. On May 16th, Rachel suggested framework questions and parameters for the investigation and recommended 3 abuse firms to look into the matter and recommending guideposts as the #1 option. Danny Aiken replies to the email the next day, May 17th, happy with the terms that Rachel laid out and the parameters of the investigation. And he was also happy with the 3 firms she recommended and will fully cooperate in any investigation. But on May 18th, Tom Buck and the elders of First Baptist Church wrote back with expanded parameters and questions for the scope of the investigation, and argued not to use abuse firms, but rather law firms. We believe a law firm is better equipped to get the facts in this case as opposed to groups that do good work for what they are equipped to do, but not cut out for this type of investigation. Generally, the charitable groups you recommended are wonderful for working with known victims of sexual abuse because they have special training in understanding those victims. In this situation, we need an investigation to establish the facts about the blackmail and Southeastern's relationship to it. Keith and Karen have conflicting stories based on the video calls we have had about what transpired the week of March 26th through April 7th. In Karen's case, her memory seems to fail her in several key areas. We need to discover the facts in this case. On May 19th, 2022, Rachel Denhollander writes a very lengthy email to Danny Aiken and Pastor Tom, arguing her choice in abuse firms and doesn't recommend law firms. As a general rule, I actually typically do not recommend law firms because it is very difficult for practicing attorneys to move out in the mindset of protecting liability into the mindset of disclosure and accountability. But Rachel did recommend Miller and Martin law firms, as they did the investigation for Ravi Zacharias International Ministries to vet the allegations of abuse against Ravi. I did not work personally with them, but was very pleased with their process and work product. On May 20th, Danny Aiken writes back to Rachel and Tom, and for the first time says he will not go with any other firm that Rachel does not recommend. I strongly prefer to go with a firm you recommend. We will not agree to one you do not recommend and have confidence in it. You are the expert and we are not. Which goes to show that Danny Aiken is making Rachel's opinion the determining factor for conducting the investigation. The Bucks never officially agreed to have Rachel's opinion to have the final say, but regardless, the Bucks will eventually choose one of her recommended firms. Danny Aiken also goes on to say that he will be happy to make available all phone records, calls, and text messages and emails. But as of this recording, we've never received any of the phone records, text messages, or emails of either Keith or Karen prior. And one final thing, Danny Aiken suddenly changes his mind on Southeastern covering the cost of the investigation, which goes to show he's already wavering in doing an investigation without caveats. At first, he was willing to cover the full cost. Now he thinks it's fair to split the cost. I believe what will be right and fair is to split the cost. However, because Southeastern desires for her name to be cleared in this matter, we are willing to bear the full cost in the investigation if it comes to that. The next couple of days, Pastor Tom was busy because he was attending his son's wedding and was vacationing in Florida. But despite his busy schedule, Tom writes back on May 23rd to Rachel Denhollander that Miller & Martin law firm was a good option. I don't know Miller & Martin, but I think their Ravi Zacharias International Ministries report was good. I don't object to them being an option. But suddenly, there was just silence. Strangely, there was just silence from Dr. Aiken and Rachel Denhollander for over a week. Pastor Tom gets back from his vacation on May 28th, and still hearing no reply from Rachel, Tom writes back to her on June 2nd. But there was no reply, just silence. After hearing nothing for another week, Tom writes again to Dr. Aiken. At this point, it's been almost a month, and no law firm has been chosen for the investigation. And the 2022 Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting is next week, and the Bucks wanted to have a firm chosen and written agreement on the parameters of the investigation before that. Now Pastor Tom feels it's now time to choose a firm to move forward with the investigation. On June 6, Tom writes to Danny Aiken, "You agreed on May 11th to conduct a full investigation. While there have been some understandable and unavoidable delays, we believe it's beyond time to move forward. We're asking for this firm to be chosen by this Wednesday, June 10th. 1 month has been more than enough to select an appropriate investigation firm. Our offer to let the investigation substitute for our legal action was contingent on Southeastern agreeing to a reasonably prompt investigation. If Southeastern refuses to engage in a Christian process, one that is just, fair, and timely, we believe we are free to address our concerns in other ways." The same day, Danny Aiken responds to Pastor Tom, and he was shockingly very offended and angry at Pastor Tom, and he terminated the investigation altogether. "Tom, my brother, I find your email deeply offensive. I have been waiting for you to re-engage following the wedding of your son and your vacation. You did not do that until today. Don't try to put this on us. I have told you repeatedly you two often play the bully. You are doing it again. FYI, I have continued to look into the things since you went dark, to use your words, and seek to uncover any information that will indicate anyone at Southeastern, 1, worked to disseminate Jennifer's essay, and 2, that anyone here sought to blackmail you and besmirch your name. I have found none, 0, nothing. In fact, more information has come to my attention that indicates without question we weren't. As a result, I'll be conferring with Art Wary and our Board of Trustees to inform them I recommend we not engage a third-party investigation because I know what it will show, and it will be a wasteful expenditure of God's money." And just like that, the investigation ended. But it didn't stop there. Coincidentally, 2 days later, Danny Aiken makes a public statement on Southeastern's website, claiming they have finally concluded the investigation and found that no faculty at Southeastern leaked Jennifer's rough draft. But that's not true. They never did an investigation. Danny Aiken terminated it. So what did they conclude? Well, they claim that they had no responsibility because they have received an anonymous email claiming full responsibility of the matter. On June 8, 2022, Southeastern was informed that an anonymous couple had reached out to Rachel Denhollander to take responsibility for the attempted use of the Bucks article's draft as retaliation for Pastor Bucks raising concern related to an individual at Willie Rice's church. This couple provided corroborating information to validate that they were the original actors and that they acted alone.
You serious?
At this point, it is just laughable that anonymous text messages and emails just come out of thin air just to save the day for specific people. But as of this recording, this is still the position of Southeastern. Even as recently as March 24th, 2023, they still affirmed that this anonymous couple is authentic. Yes, the couple is anonymous, but we trust that Rachel, in her professional experience, was able to feel comfortable enough with the information that it was authentic. This couple shared with Rachel that no one associated with Southeastern was involved. It is because of this, we feel it is necessary and important to break down the anonymous couple's email that was sent to Southeastern and compare it to all the evidence that we have presented up to this point. And for the sake of time, we're going to list 4 major reasons. The first reason is that the motive in the anonymous couple's email is in conflict with the anonymous person's email that was sent to B&G. The anonymous couple claims that they wanted to stop Pastor Tom because we became extremely angry over it all because one of us is an abuse survivor, until we found out Pastor Tom was the person behind these actions, and I knew I had knowledge that he had his own history of abuse. And they also claim they did this out of their own volition. We want to be clear that we acted of our own free will. We did this without anyone else's advice or prompting. But according to the email sent to BNG, this person claims that he sent Jennifer's rough draft because an SBC friend suggested I send this to you along with these thoughts. So which motive is correct? Was it out of their free will, or was it because of one of their friends? We're going to go with the motive in the BNG email because at least we can verify it was sent to BNG, because the author of the hit piece, David Baumgartner, confirms it.
Concerned, yeah, a person calling themselves Concerned SBC.
Yeah, and it talks about me being a massive man. That's my favorite line.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, so that's the same email.
The second reason is that the anonymous couple doesn't sufficiently explain how they received the rough draft. According to the anonymous couple, they received the Word doc of the article about 2 years ago. Another friend sent it to me following a conversation about something Tom had said or done online, but then I basically forgot about the article itself until all of this started. But how is that possible? There is no evidence that Karen sent the rough draft beyond Andrea Dilley, and if we recall, Andrea Dilley gave a strong no to sharing the rough draft, nor anyone approaching her to authenticate the rough draft. And it wasn't until April 1st, 2022, when suddenly the draft became available in the public domain and was shared around as hot gossip. In addition, Pastor Tom is a very public figure in the SBC. Love him or hate him, he is very vocal about the issues occurring in the SBC. If the draft was circulating for that long, why not smear him back then? Why is it now that the draft suddenly shows up? But we already know why the draft shows up now. Because someone saw Pastor Tom as a political threat against Willie Rice. If you recall, there was a very short time frame between the meeting with Willie Rice and the article sent to BNG. And this short time frame is proof enough that someone had to have 1, the knowledge about Willie Rice's meeting, 2, had motive to send the rough draft to BNG, and 3, had quick access to the rough draft. And the only one we know that fits all 3 points is Keith Whitfield, as he had knowledge of the meeting, he had political motive to send the draft, and he had quick access to the rough draft because of his relationship with Karen Pryor, which leads to the third point. The third reason is, how could the anonymous couple have known about the meeting with Willie Rice and Tom Buck when so few people knew about it to begin with? If you recall, only 8 people knew about Willie Rice's meeting before the article was sent to BNG. Tom Buck, 2 of his elders, Willie Rice, 1 of his staff, Rachel Denhollander, Josh Wester, and Keith Whitfield. This is a very small group. So how did this anonymous couple know about the meeting? They never specify or clarify in the email. Instead, they say the following. Many weeks ago, we spoke with someone about a situation at Willie Rice's church involving one of his deacons and past sexual abuse. It seemed obvious someone was using something as horrible as abuse to play politics. We became extremely angry over it all because one of us is an abuse survivor. Then we found out Pastor Tom Buck was the person behind these actions. As you see, this statement is just too vague. The anonymous couple does not explain specifically who they received the information about Willie Rice's meeting. They don't explain how they knew about the deacon and his past. They don't explain how they knew Tom Buck was behind all these actions. The wording is just too vague and nebulous. In fact, if one reads the entire email, it's just filled with vague and nebulous statements about the surrounding events with BNG and Keith and Karen and so on. The sheer fact that we are asking all these questions and getting no substantive answers is what leads to the biggest reason to reject the anonymous couple's email. The fourth and final reason is that it's just hearsay evidence. It's shocking that Southeastern wants to hold very tightly to Rachel's legal experience as the standard for judging the email's authenticity. But if Rachel is the legal attorney she claims to be, then she should know that this anonymous email would never hold up in court. It's because it's just hearsay. It's just a random, unnamed couple claiming they did this without any ability to cross-examine and ask questions. questions. According to Cornell Law School, hearsay is an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of whatever it asserts, which is then offered in evidence to prove the truth of the matter. The problem with hearsay is that when the person being quoted is not present, it becomes impossible to establish credibility. As a result, hearsay evidence is generally not admissible in court. And since we don't know who this anonymous couple is, we can't ask questions and we can't get answers. It could be anybody. It could be Uncle Joe and Aunt Sue down the street that wrote this email. We just simply don't know. And not only would Rachel would have known this anonymous email would not hold up in court, but she also had a conflict of interest to authenticate and clear her friend Karen Pryor. Because if you recall, her friend Karen Pryor reached out to her on March 31st for advice on what to do when Keith approached her to authenticate the rough draft. And during the investigation process, Danny makes Rachel the final say in choosing a firm, then becoming the sole expert in authenticating anonymous emails, and then finally the sole arbiter in closing the investigation. So we believe Rachel has a conflict of interest in this case. And until this so-called anonymous couple comes forth, we have reason to doubt that this email is authentic. It just leaves too many open-ended questions unanswered. And one final thing. Tom and Jennifer spent the past year accumulating all the evidence that has appeared in this documentary, and I spent the past 3 months editing this visual timeline, from text messages and video calls and Twitter threads and audio recordings and news articles and authentic, verified emails. Are we now to suddenly close the case because of some one random email we can't verify? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I know even Scooby-Doo doesn't conclude a case like this. There is so much evidence pointing to Southeastern, it's hard to ignore that the fires are still burning. Southeastern has still yet to conduct an actual investigation of Keith and Karen's actions in the mishandling of Jennifer's rough draft. But as of this recording, Karen Pryor announces she no longer will be working at Southeastern, so only Keith can be properly investigated. But at this point, do we really believe Southeastern will do anything? Since Danny Akin's statement on June 6, 2022, the Bucks began to accumulate even more evidence on what had occurred, and there has been an attempt by the Bucks to meet in person to present the new evidence. Even Jennifer Buck wrote personally to Southeastern on March 31, 2023.
I continue to believe this situation warrants and deserves an in-person meeting. I believe I have evidence that the employees of SEBTS have harmed me greatly as a survivor of sexual abuse. An in-person meeting where you can hear me and address my concerns is a simple expression of you caring well for me.
But instead, Southeastern was unwilling to meet in person and wrote back to the Bucks on April 3, 2023. We encourage you to go ahead and release all the evidence that you possess, and to do so publicly. We have no desire on our end for anything to be concealed. We assure you that whatever new material you release will be given the careful consideration it deserves. So that's why these videos are public, because they told us to. And we hope that the public opinion might sway the conscience of Southeastern to actually do an investigation, because we do want justice for Jennifer.
The first thing from the side of justice is that they see the amount of evidence that we have that should point that there needs to be an investigation. In fact, we have presented more evidence, and we haven't shown it all. You have evidence that will not even make it into the cut.
We do want to have an independent investigation as to what happened at Southeastern, as there is undeniable evidence pointing to the mishandling of Jennifer's private, but beautiful story of God's redemptive work in their marriage to smear Pastor Tom. But if you really think about it, that's all really what the Bucks wanted to do, was to just tell their story of how God saved their marriage. It's the same story they've been telling for over 30 years. I mean, they weren't trying to hide anything from the public. They just wanted people to know what God has done for them.
Because at the end of the day, our goal is to help you with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I've been in some very dark places in my life as a man who God changed. And if God can change me, he can change you. And it gives hope to those men. And of course, the wives, it gives hope to them too, because they go, wow, if God can change him, God can change my husband.
While there are many unrepentant people in the SBC, clouded in darkness of politics and victimhood, the bright flame of the gospel is still burning. Despite the slander, the gossip, and mistreatment the Bucks experience, in the midst of the inferno, a diamond was forged. From the ashes, a beautiful, luminous story of God's redeeming power in saving a marriage was shared to the world, and many were encouraged and strengthened by their story.
At one time, I was working with 7 different individuals because there was just so many women coming forward on how do I walk through this and how do I learn to think rightly about things and how do I pray for my husband and encourage him. And
yeah, for me, I had husbands who would come to me, husbands and wives, and the husband, what they do is they look at me and they say, Tom can understand that the kind of sin that can grip you and the anger and all of those things that can damage the marriage. And they look at me like if I'm not going to judge them.
This is because the Bucks are not victims, but overcomers. Because of the gospel, Jennifer no longer calls herself an abuse survivor, but a beautiful wife to her husband. And because of the gospel, Tom is no longer an abuser, but a faithful husband to his wife. And that gospel, that fire, will still be burning to the glory of God alone. Soli Deo Gloria.